They thought pulling her over would be routine. They were wrong. She wasn't just any driver, she was the architect of one of America's most trusted AI firms. And when red and blue lights flashed in the night, she turned a routine stop into a quiet revolution. Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. We love seeing how far stories like this travel. It was 11:23 p.m. on a Monday in downtown Chicago. The streets gleamed under the rain that had just stopped, reflecting the city lights like countless diamonds on black velvet. Only the occasional taxi moved through the financial district, tires hissing against wet asphalt. That's when Melissa Richardson, 48, found herself driving through the quiet streets in her midnight blue Tesla Model S. She'd just finished a grueling 14-hour strategy session at headquarters. As CEO and founder of Meridian AI, a company she built from scratch into a $2.3 billion enterprise focused on ethical artificial intelligence, Melissa was looking forward to getting home to her brownstone in Hyde Park, maybe catching the end of her favorite late-night jazz radio show. The thought of kicking off her heels those uncomfortable yet powerful Louboutins she'd worn specifically for today's investor meeting was what had kept her going through the final hours of negotiations. Her phone sat silent in the console. She hummed along with Ella Fitzgerald's velvet voice flowing from the car's premium sound system, her mind already planning tomorrow's board meeting. The Tesla glided smoothly down Michigan Avenue, its autopilot features disabled because, after years of building autonomy into machines, Melissa preferred control when she drove. She checked her rearview mirror. Nothing but darkness and the occasional streetlight. She was doing 35 in a 35 zone, not even thinking about speed limits or stop signs. Her mind was on quarterly projections and the new ethics board she was implementing. That's when the familiar blue lights filled her mirror, strobing through the darkness and reflecting off the wet pavement in disorienting flashes. Her stomach dropped immediately, a visceral reaction that bypassed conscious thought, the product of a lifetime of conditioning that no amount of corporate success could fully erase. Sergeant Marcus Holloway had been sitting in his patrol car for the last 2 hours, parked in the shadow of an office building's overhang. 42 years old, 15 years on the force, and growing more cynical by the day. His coffee had gone cold in its paper cup. His phone battery was at 23%, and his shift had been a complete zero. No action, no arrests, not even a decent story to tell tomorrow. The divorce papers waited for him at home. His second failed marriage and the child support payments for his first marriage were already stretching his paycheck to the breaking point. His ex called him a control freak. His sergeant called him detail-oriented. Either way, Marcus Holloway liked the world orderly, predictable, and respectful of authority. His authority. Then he spotted a late-model Tesla, tinted windows just slightly darker than strictly legal, moving through a business district long after business hours. In his experience, expensive cars in empty districts meant one of three things: drug deals, stolen vehicles, or rich kids looking for trouble. He flipped on his lights and accelerated, feeling the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with asserting control over a situation. Melissa saw the lights and felt that familiar knot in her stomach tighten like a fist. She'd been here before. Not recently. Success had insulated her from many forms of harassment, but the memory was sharp as a razor. She pulled over smoothly to a well-lit area outside a closed bank. The illuminated ATM vestibule provided just enough ambient light to ensure any interaction would be visible to the building's security cameras. She turned off the engine and rolled down the window, placing both hands on the steering wheel at the 10 and 2 positions, clearly visible. Years of boardroom negotiations had taught her that the escalation starts with body language. Holloway approached, the deliberate heaviness of his footsteps audible on the wet pavement. His flashlight was in one hand, while his other hand rested casually near his service weapon. He shone the light directly into the car, momentarily blinding her. "License and registration," he stated flatly. No greeting. No explanation. Just a demand backed by implied authority. "Good evening, officer. May I ask why I was stopped?" Her voice was professional, controlled the same tone she used with hostile investors or board members who underestimated her. "You drifted outside your lane back there. Seemed like you might be impaired or distracted. License and registration." Holloway's voice carried the bored indifference of routine, but his eyes were alert, scanning her and the vehicle for any sign of something amiss. Melissa's jaw tightened slightly. She hadn't drifted. Her car's lane-keeping system would have alerted her. But arguing facts with police officers rarely led to productive outcomes. "I assure you I'm neither impaired nor distracted. I'm just heading home from work." She reached slowly for her purse. "I'm going to get my documents now." As she handed over her driver's license and registration, she added quietly, "I'm the CEO of Meridian AI. This vehicle is registered to our company fleet." Holloway glanced at the documents, then back at her. "Big shot, huh? Well, rules apply to everyone, Ms. Richardson. I never suggested they didn't. I'm simply providing context." Her grip on the steering wheel tightened imperceptibly, knuckles pressing white against her dark skin before she consciously relaxed them. The sergeant's eyes narrowed. He studied her for a long moment, taking in the designer suit now crumpled from a long day, the rimless glasses perched perfectly despite exhaustion, the way she met his gaze without flinching. Something about her composure irritated him like sandpaper against his already raw nerves. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered, his tone hardening. "I'm sorry." The question was genuine. The request seemed to come out of nowhere. "I said step out of the vehicle. I need to conduct a field sobriety test." His posture shifted, feet planted wider apart, shoulders squared preparing for resistance. Melissa's heart rate increased, but her voice remained steady. "On what grounds?" "I've complied with your requests. I've provided identification. I wasn't speeding, and I haven't exhibited any signs of impairment. Now you're refusing a lawful order." Holloway's tone suggested he'd found exactly what he was looking for, any hint of non-compliance that could justify escalation. "I'm asking for clarification." She reached slowly for her phone. "I'm going to start recording this interaction for both our protection." The camera light blinked red, a tiny crimson eye documenting what was rapidly becoming a textbook case of overreach. For the first time, Holloway hesitated. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his features, the calculation of risk versus reward playing out visibly. But pride won over caution. "Out of the car. Now." Melissa unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out, the recording still active in her hand. At 5 feet 7 inches in those Louboutins, she stood almost eye to eye with the officer. Her presence was commanding, shoulders back, chin level, every inch of her radiating quiet authority. "I want it clearly stated that I am complying under protest," she said to the camera. "Officer, your name and badge number, please." "Sergeant Marcus Holloway, badge 347. He recited it automatically, then seemed to regret it. The field sobriety test was almost comical. Melissa followed every instruction perfectly, walked the line with precise steps, touched her nose with mathematical accuracy, recited the alphabet without hesitation. Each task executed with the same precision she applied to product launches. Throughout the test, she continued recording. Holloway's jaw worked as if chewing words he couldn't swallow. He was fishing, and they both knew it. "Seems like you're impaired to me," he finally declared, though his conviction wavered. "That's objectively false, and we both know it," Melissa responded evenly. "I've completed every test perfectly." "What's the real issue here, Sergeant?" Her breath formed small clouds in the cool night air between them. That question hung in the air like a challenge. Holloway's hand moved back to his weapon, not drawing it, but a clear intimidation tactic. "The real issue is your attitude," he snapped. "You think because you run some company, you're above the law. I think because I'm a citizen who's done nothing wrong, I deserve basic respect." She kept her voice level, but there was steel beneath the velvet. Their eyes locked. In that moment, the power dynamic was clear to both of them, even if only one was willing to acknowledge it. He handed her the ticket, failure to maintain lane position. $175. The paper was slightly damp from the misting rain, the ink already beginning to blur at the edges. Melissa took it without reaction. She'd just authorized a $50 million equipment purchase that afternoon. The money meant nothing. The principle meant everything. "Am I free to go now, Sergeant Holloway?" The question was formal, almost ceremonial, a verbal full stop to the interaction. "Yeah. Watch your driving." He stepped back, holstering his flashlight. She returned to her car with measured steps, her back straight, dignity intact. Only once she was inside with the door closed did she allow herself a moment of reaction, a single deep, shuddering breath that carried the weight of history, of every similar interaction she had experienced or witnessed. Back at the precinct, Holloway filed the ticket as routine. In the break room, he mentioned it casually to Officer Davis, a younger cop who still possessed some of the idealism Holloway had shed years ago. "Pulled over some CEO tonight. Meridian AI or something. Tried to throw her weight around, talking about recording the stop." He poured coffee into a styrofoam cup, grimacing at the burnt smell. Davis's eyebrows shot up. "Meridian AI. Melissa Richardson?" "Yeah, that's the name." "Know her?" Holloway stirred powdered creamer into his coffee, the spoon clinking against the sides of the cup in the quiet room. "Know of her. She's not just some CEO. Forbes 500. Builds ethical AI systems. Wrote that book about algorithmic bias the chief made us all read last year. She spoke at that police tech conference in 2020. Davis's voice held a note of admiration mixed with concern. Her company designs half the facial recognition software used by departments nationwide. Holloway shrugged, but Davis could see the flicker of uncertainty cross his features, the first inkling that tonight's routine traffic stop might have unforeseen consequences. "Might want to review that body cam footage before writing this one up, Sarge." Davis's suggestion was casual, but the implication was clear. The footage sat untouched for 3 days. Melissa spent those days at her office on the 47th floor of the Meridian building. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased a panoramic view of Chicago spread out below like a living map. She said nothing to her staff about the stop. No press releases, no social media posts. Instead, she methodically worked with her legal team. The video from her phone was comprehensive, damning. But litigation wasn't her first choice. She believed in systems, in the possibility of reform. "We could handle this internally," suggested her general counsel, Robert Chon. "Make some calls." This Holloway wouldn't know what hit him. "No," Melissa said firmly. "If we want to change systems, we have to trust them first." The court summons arrived at the precinct on a Friday. Holloway was in the parking lot, about to start his shift, when the envelope appeared on his windshield. Hand-delivered. Personal service. He opened it against his truck, the paper rustling in the breeze that swept through the parking structure. Civil rights violation. Federal court. Plaintiff, Melissa Richardson. Charges, unlawful detainment. Intimidation. Violation of Fourth Amendment rights. This time, he didn't laugh. The air seemed suddenly colder, the morning less bright. That night, Holloway sat alone in his apartment, a space that still felt temporary despite the 3 years he'd lived there since the separation. A half-eaten microwave dinner sat congealing on the coffee table. The television flickered with muted light, some late-night business program he'd never normally watch. And then there she was. Melissa Richardson on his screen, in an interview from several months back. She was discussing ethical AI and algorithmic bias in policing. Her voice was measured, her points precise. The goal isn't to eliminate human judgment, but to supplement it with tools that don't carry our unconscious prejudices, she was saying. Police officers make split-second decisions in high-pressure situations. We should be giving them the best possible information, free from historical biases that might skew those decisions. Holloway stared at her face on the screen, the same face he'd illuminated with his flashlight, the same voice that had calmly asked him for his badge number. For the first time, he felt something beyond defensiveness. Something uncomfortably close to shame. He'd been that officer she was talking about, making split-second judgments based on, what, exactly? An expensive car in a business district? A woman who didn't immediately defer to his authority? A black woman who looked too confident behind the wheel of a Tesla? The realization sat heavy in his stomach, more bitter than the cheap scotch he'd poured himself when he got home. He reached for the remote and turned off the TV, but the silence that followed was somehow worse. Chief Patricia Morrison called him in immediately the next morning. Her office had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Photos of community outreach programs lined the walls, including one from 2020 where Melissa Richardson stood beside the chief at a police tech summit. "Sit," Morrison commanded, her voice clipped. "Chief, this is video evidence," she cut him off, turning her monitor toward him. His body cam footage played, synchronized with Melissa's phone recording in a split-screen display that left nowhere to hide. She never raised her voice, Morrison noted. Never disrespected your authority. Just asked questions any citizen has the right to ask. She was being difficult. She was being careful. And smart. Because she knew this might happen. Morrison's voice was controlled but glacial. The chief leaned back in her chair, the leather creaking slightly. Melissa Richardson isn't just some angry citizen with lawyers. She's one of the most respected business leaders in this city. She's contributed $2 million to our tech upgrades. She's on the mayor's AI Ethics Council. Do you understand what you've done? For the first time, Holloway felt real fear, not the momentary adrenaline spike of a dangerous call, but the cold dread of watching one's career, pension, and reputation balanced on a knife's edge. You're going to court, Morrison continued. And I hope you have a good lawyer. The courthouse steps were crowded on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks later. Not with reporters. Despite the high-profile nature, both parties had maintained strict privacy. But supporters had gathered anyway. Meridian employees, women in tech with bias-free systems, buttons pinned to lapels, community leaders with expressions both solemn and determined. Melissa arrived in a black Tesla sedan, emerging in a charcoal gray suit that whispered of tailored perfection. Her natural hair was styled in an elegant updo, and she wore a single piece of jewelry, her grandmother's pearl necklace, a reminder of where she came from and who she carried with her. Inside, the courthouse was all polished wood and echoing halls. She'd chosen to represent herself at the preliminary hearing, a calculated risk that would either empower or backfire. Her legal team sat behind her as advisors. Holloway was already seated when she entered. He wore his dress uniform, medals polished, but his usual confidence was notably absent. His union-appointed lawyer, Richard Brennan, whispered urgently as Melissa took her place at the plaintiff's table. The judge, Honorable Elena Vasquez, called for order. The gavel's crack silenced the room instantly. Ms. Richardson, you're representing yourself today? Judge Vasquez's dark eyes were keen, missing nothing. Yes, Your Honor. I believe my technical background in systems analysis may provide unique insight into this case. Melissa's voice carried easily in the acoustically perfect courtroom. She proceeded with precision, laying out her case methodically. The video evidence played on screens visible to the judge and both tables. During her statement, she spoke directly to the judge. Your Honor, this isn't simply about one traffic stop. It's about the systematic way power can be abused when there's an assumption of authority without accountability. As someone who builds systems designed to serve everyone fairly, I cannot remain silent when human systems fail so badly. She detailed the Fourth Amendment violations, cited case law, and dismantled the probable cause argument piece by piece. When Holloway took the stand, Melissa's cross-examination was surgical. Sergeant Holloway, you stated in your report that I was drifting between lanes. Can you identify the specific timestamp in your dash cam footage where this occurred? Silence filled the courtroom. Holloway shifted in his seat, the leather creaking audibly in the hush. You wrote that I exhibited signs of possible impairment. What specific signs did you observe before ordering the sobriety test? You seemed distracted. His voice lacked conviction. I was answering your questions politely and providing requested documentation. Is that your definition of distracted, or is it perhaps your definition of a confident black woman who doesn't immediately defer to authority? The objection was immediate. But the point had landed. Later, during closing arguments, Melissa addressed both the judge and the broader implications. What happened that night wasn't personal. It was systemic. Sergeant Holloway saw someone who didn't fit his expectation of who belongs in an expensive car at night. He saw someone who asked questions instead of showing immediate deference. And he responded with intimidation tactics designed to make me small. But here's what truly matters: systems can be fixed. People can learn. If nothing else, let this case serve as a reminder that the badge is meant to protect, not intimidate. Authority is meant to serve, not suppress. The ruling came down 2 weeks later. Judge Vasquez found for the plaintiff on all counts. The court finds that Sergeant Holloway violated the plaintiff's Fourth Amendment rights, Judge Vasquez read. The stop lacked probable cause, and the escalation tactics employed were inappropriate and potentially discriminatory. Ms. Richardson is awarded $75,000 in damages. Additionally, this ruling will be sent to the Chicago Police Department for policy review and mandatory de-escalation training. Melissa stood still as the judgment was read. No celebration, no vindication, just the quiet satisfaction of principle upheld. The system, when properly engaged, could work. That was the point. That had always been the point. Holloway was suspended pending internal investigation. The police union promised appeals, but even they seemed half-hearted. The video evidence was simply too clear. Outside the courthouse, Melissa spoke briefly to a small group of Meridian employees who had gathered. This was never about revenge. It was about accountability. The same principles we apply to our AI systems: transparency, fairness, the absence of bias should apply to all systems that govern our lives. 3 months later, Melissa stood before a roomful of young entrepreneurs at Northwestern University. The auditorium was filled to capacity. They'd invited her to speak about technology ethics, but she began with a different story. How many of you believe that success insulates you from injustice? She asked the crowd of ambitious 20-somethings. Her voice was warm now, inviting connection rather than commanding attention. A few hands went up tentatively, students looking around to see if they were alone in their assumption. Let me tell you about a night when I learned that lesson anew, she continued, moving away from the podium to stand closer to the audience. Because here's the truth about power, it's not what protects you. It's what you do when you're vulnerable that defines your real strength. She recounted the traffic stop, not for sympathy or outrage, but as a case study in leadership. Her hand sketched the scene in the air, bringing the narrative to life in the hushed auditorium. I had choices that night, she explained, her gaze moving across the attentive faces before her. I could have grown angry and escalated. I could have used my connections to make the problem disappear. I could have stayed silent and let it go. Instead, I chose to trust the system while holding it accountable. I chose to use my voice without raising it. I chose to prove that dignity doesn't need to shout to be heard. In the back row, a young black woman sat forward, listening intently, her pen poised over a notebook filled with neat, precise handwriting. Her eyes never left Melissa's face. The most powerful thing you can do, Melissa concluded, her voice dropping slightly so the audience had to lean in to hear her, is to stand firm in your principles without compromising your integrity. Because the moment you react with the same intimidation you're facing, you've already lost. Real leadership isn't about commanding attention. It's about commanding respect through consistency, competence, and courage. She paused, surveying the room, taking in the varied faces that represented the future of technology, business, and potentially, social change. Remember this, you don't just build companies or careers. You build precedents. Every time you choose dignity over defensiveness, principle over power plays, you create a blueprint for others to follow. That's not just success. That's legacy. As she concluded her talk, she gestured to a small frame she'd placed on the podium earlier. Inside was the ticket from that rainy night, failure to maintain lane position, now preserved behind glass. She touched it briefly. This sits on my desk now, between my Forbes cover and my grandmother's photo. Not as a reminder of injustice, but as a reminder that systems can change when we engage with them properly. That dignity is non-negotiable. And that sometimes, the most revolutionary act is simply standing your ground in red-bottomed shoes. She smiled slightly at the reference to her Louboutins, which were now displayed in a small glass case in her office lobby next to the framed ticket with a small plaque reading, "Leadership stands tall." The young woman in the back row furiously took notes, her pen moving almost as fast as her mind was processing the lesson. In her features, one might glimpse the same determination, the same unwavering sense of worth, that had carried Melissa Richardson from a girl with dreams to a woman with impact. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it, a colleague, a leader, or anyone who has ever been misjudged by appearances. Don't forget to comment, what would you have done in this situation? Remember, true leadership under pressure doesn't shout, it stands its ground with quiet strength and unwavering principles. Because in the end, the most profound revolutions happen not in the streets or the courts alone, but in the moments when we choose courage over compliance, principle over expedience, and justice over just getting by. The night is darkest before the dawn. But when dawn breaks, it illuminates everything, and sometimes, what it reveals is a path forward that we create with each principled stand we take.